All right. Hey, Redeemer.
Hey, Redeemer.
Eric and Marshall with you again in hopes that by combining our two brains, we could give you one good insight. So this week we're going to follow up on the word that Pastor Steve King brought us on Sunday from Matthew 6 about anxiety, peace, about Jesus being the foundation of a life of peace and freedom from worldly worry about our lives, about tomorrow. Really thankful for him coming and speaking to us. Really thankful for him serving us in that way. Eric, as we look at Matthew 6:25 through 34, where do you want to start today?
Well, Steve's message was amazing. I loved it. And, let's play the devil's advocate a little bit for you, Marshall. Name the places in Scripture where Paul was anxious, where he clearly speaks to his people and he says, I am anxious. Just off the top of your head, a couple places where he says that. And I would love for you, Redeemer, just to go to those places and read them. NIV, ESV, if you've got it.
Yeah, I don't have the scripture references.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have specific passages in mind, but I know that they're all throughout his epistles. Paul is not shy about telling them, I am anxious for the churches.
Yep.
It's very clear that he has a level of investment and concern for the churches that I don't think that agonize would be too strong of a word to say that he feels such a compassion and a love for the people that he's invested in, the churches that he's planted, the people that he loves, that he really is at the end of himself and saying, Lord, I care so much about these people. Would you bless them? Would you protect them? Would you grow them? And it is defined by the word of Paul himself. Like I have an anxiety and a concern for them.
Yep. Yeah. Philippians 2:28. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him so that when you see him, this is Epaphroditus who came from Philippi to visit him in jail. You may see him again and you may be glad and I may have less anxiety. 2 Corinthians 11:28. The daily anxieties I feel for the churches. In Luke's account and Matthew's account of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, the anxiety he felt before the cross. And so, the reason why I ask you is, when Jesus is talking about, in Matthew 6, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. And so this is, I think, where we have to be the theologians of our generation. And now we're, I think, as a church, 3 generations? So I can't say our generation, there's 3 generations, is, we have to be really particular about what's the sliding scale of anxieties. And I'm not necessarily looking for this, well, what's sinful and what's not sinful. And, I just think we have to be really nuanced in our understanding. And I do this as a pastor is so not to create guilt that the Bible does not create guilt for. Yeah. And so as to be a trusting people in the Spirit of God, as there is anxiety that is dishonorable to the Lord. And then there's also anxiety that is just connected with the Spirit's work in people's lives. And if you've been involved in spiritual work in people's lives, you understand the 2 Corinthians 11 part, especially where you come to the end of yourself and what you can do in the life of people, especially if you're separated. And it's the daily anxiety you feel for those people. And it's not that you idolatrously worry about them. You just come to the end of yourself and you are like, Lord, do something. And I think that's what Paul is doing. And Epaphroditus was sick and almost died. And I'm sure what he's saying to the people in Philippi is like, man, I'm glad he's gone. I'm glad he got better, and I'm glad he's with you. I have less anxiety because he was sick as a dog here. And I ain't got time for that.
Yeah.
And I think we've all felt that.
Yeah.
And I think we just also understand that when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he is asking the Lord to take this cup away, and he knows the suffering, and he knows that the Father is going to pour out his wrath, like, yeah, and toil.
Yeah.
Like, so I think we have to have a thorough biblical understanding of what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 6 and what Luke's account and Matthew's account and Paul's account, and then obviously Philippians 4, Judea and Syntyche are having a conflict about who knows what, and he's saying to Clement, get involved, and then he's saying, don't be anxious about anything. Well, what? You just said you were anxious about Epaphroditus in chapter 2. So obviously there's, even in Paul's mind, a sliding scale of anxiety. Well, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, with thanksgiving and prayer, present your requests to God. And so okay, Paul, I bet you that's what you did when you were anxious about Epaphroditus. You went to the Lord. And I think that, that's the big neon sign of, like, Redeemer. When you come to the end of yourself in the spiritual battle over the souls of people, whether they're Christian or non-Christian, go to the Lord, go to the Lord, go to the Lord, go to the Lord. And I don't necessarily think that's sinful.
No. I think these are important distinctions to make sure that we don't take a verse out of context, or take a specific promise and then or command and then overstretch it.
Exactly.
Like we don't want to take something like, I tell you, don't be anxious about your life, or don't be anxious about anything, and then spin it to a point where it sort of becomes a cudgel.
Yep.
Anytime someone feels some kind of concern about something,
Yep.
to be like, you're sinning. Stop it.
Stop it.
And to be clear, I think that, we agree that Steve King was not doing that. Like the context of his sermon makes it very clear. The context of this passage makes it very clear. But to be sure that we have these distinctions in our mind. Eric.
Sorry.
All right. You want to keep rolling?
Yep.
Yeah. So to be sure we have these distinctions in our minds of there is a kind of concern and anxiety for things that is rooted in idolatry, which Steve did a really good job of laying out, and which Jesus is addressing in this passage.
Yep.
And then there's another concern that is a level of appropriate concern, a level of appropriate anxiety about something, to what you're saying. Hey, if you never want to be anxious, then don't have kids, don't have kids, either, biological or, in your family or in your faith family, never love anything if you don't want to be anxious ever. And then there are also, we have people in our church family, people that we love, who struggle with depression and anxiety, where it is appropriate and it is God's grace to seek out counseling, to seek out therapy, to seek out what the Lord has provided for us through medicine. And the word of the Lord does not come to a person struggling with these other kinds of anxieties to say, hey, just stop it, but to comfort them, to give grace to them. But there is, which Jesus is addressing in this passage specifically, a kind of worry, which is inappropriate for the believer, and which is a matter of something that we need to take action to, as Steve was saying, to redirect our perspective, the foundation of our lives. So,
well, that's what I love so much about I mean, this is where Paul does. This is what I love about Steve's, because Steve is so rooted in the Word. This is why, for Redeemer, we're an apostolic church. Steve is so rooted in the apostles' teaching. When he said that this text is about God, and that's the same thing for Paul. Paul's admonishment to the Philippian church in chapter 4. He keeps saying the reason why they don't have to be anxious, rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. The Lord is near. The Lord is near. And, the main question we were kicking around is like, okay, what does it really mean to trust in God, right? Trust. Why don't we worry? Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life. He keeps coming back. Jesus keeps coming back to the Father. He keeps coming back to the Father. And I was thinking about trust. Trust is a relational term. If I say that I trust someone, it's typically because I either know them, or I know someone who knows them, or I know their position, or I know their title. You think about why you trust someone. At least they have history, or you have history with someone that says they trust them. So you either trust the person, or it's one degree of separation of trusting the person, or it's trusting the person who trusts the person that says, oh yeah, you can trust this doctor. So there has to be someone that you trust that trusts the person, right? I mean, that makes sense. And then they have history, and then it's, well, what are they actually asking you to trust them with? There's a huge difference, right? If someone says, hey, can I watch your dog? Compared to, hey, sure, I can watch your kids. That's a massive difference in trust, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I have to really know you to trust you to watch my kids for a weekend. I mean, to be honest, I don't really care about my dog, so I don't really have to know you at all to watch my dog, right? So does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So then Jesus is saying, trust me with your tomorrow. What your life is much more about food and clothing, and I want your tomorrow. Don't worry about tomorrow. I got your tomorrow. Right? Am I reading the text correctly?
Yeah.
Seek first my kingdom, my righteousness. Don't worry about tomorrow. Don't even think about tomorrow. Hey, you trust your tomorrow to me. And the whole argument starts, I think it starts in verse 11. Give us today our daily bread. So a kingdom person, I mean, you guys know this, the Sermon on the Mount starts in chapter 5, 6, and 7. This is the constitution of the people of God, and the people of God are to pray to God every day, give us our daily bread. So your daily bread comes from the Lord. And then he teaches on money. And then now we're not to worry about tomorrow. So my tomorrow comes from the Lord. My daily bread comes from the Lord. Doesn't come from my money, and it doesn't come from these. It comes from the Lord. So don't worry. That's crazy. Because he's talking to his disciples that have left everything, but he's also talking to, the secondary crowd, or a lot of day laborers. So that's a big ask for the Lord to say that.
Yeah. I feel like we're in a season now where a lot of us are facing more uncertainty about tomorrow, about the next couple of weeks, the next couple of months than some of us have ever faced before.
Yep.
Which in that way brings this passage closer to home than maybe ever before. It's one thing to hear Jesus say, don't worry about tomorrow, when your refrigerator's full and you're on track for the promotion and everything feels taken care of. It's another thing when uncertainty presses in around you on all sides, to hear Jesus say, hey, how about trust me for today? You and me are going to get through today, and then I'm going to cover you for tomorrow and the next day. And right now, I'm calling you to focus on faithfulness today, seeking the kingdom today, and not allowing your heart and mind to be filled with worry about how your needs will be met tomorrow.
Yep. Well, you think about this too, like it's so simplistic, but your food was never meant to be eaten tomorrow. You can't eat your food tomorrow. Does that make sense?
Keep going.
That was the whole point in Exodus. Yeah. Manna was never meant to be eaten tomorrow. Mm-hmm. That's why God said, only go out and collect it for today.
Yeah.
So you think about it, like you may have 8 oranges in your refrigerator, but you cannot eat an orange right now for tomorrow.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You have whatever, $1,000 in the bank. You cannot spend your money right now tomorrow. I mean, it's true, right?
Yeah.
You may plan to buy a car tomorrow, but it is absolutely impossible to buy a car today, tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, and that's what worry is. Worry is it's an expending of energy and emotion and thought right now to try to solve problems that may not even exist yet.
No.
It's just an expenditure into nothingness.
Yeah. I love what Bonhoeffer says. And if you guys have not read this book, it's Dietrich Bonhoeffer. It's a bigger book. It's called Discipleship. But he says this, he says, abuse of earthly goods consists of using them as a security for the next day. Worry is always directed towards tomorrow. But the goods are intended only for today in the strictest sense. It is our securing things for tomorrow which makes us so insecure today. It is enough that each day should have its own troubles. Only those who put tomorrow completely into God's hand and receive fully today what they need for their lives are really secure. Receiving daily liberates us from tomorrow. The thought of tomorrow gives me endless worries. Do not worry about tomorrow. That is either cruel ridicule of the poor and suffering, whom Jesus is addressing, of all those who in human perspective will starve tomorrow if they do not worry today. It is either an intolerable law that people will reject and detest, or it is the unique gospel proclamation of the freedom of God's children who have a Father in heaven who has given them the gift of his dear Son. Will he not with him also give us everything else? Isn't that beautiful? I mean, and that's what Jesus' kingdom is all about. It's like, if I've given you all things, of course I'm going to clothe you and feed you. Like, I got this. I got tomorrow. And, one of the things that's just so helpful for me is when I go down the path of worry, especially with clothing and food and wealth and things like that, I just put a no trespassing sign up. And it's like Jesus is just putting this no trespassing sign up about tomorrow and just like, son, I got this. Yeah. And that's the beautiful thing about history is if you're worried about tomorrow, then take a look about yesterday and the day before and the day before and the day before and the day before and the day before. And this is the thing that Israel did so well, was they always look back to Exodus. They always look back to Exodus. God delivered us. You look at the Psalms, just God delivered us, God delivered us, God delivered us, God delivered us. And that's the thing about trust is based on history. And oh my gosh, God has been so faithful to clothe me. to give me food. Like he's really good with my tomorrows. Because I look at my yesterdays. You know, Marshall, like he's like, look at your yesterdays. I mean, how faithful has he been to provide for my yesterdays? And so when I look at that no trespassing sign, I'm like, but Lord, I've got to go into that land. I've got to look tomorrow. He's like, son, I got you.
Yeah.
Like, don't trespass. It's got enough trouble of its own. Just stay in today. You've got 2 oranges. You've got clothes on your back. They're really nice. Just stay today. I'm like, all right, I'll submit to you. I'm not going to worry. Like, and that's where it gets back to I know him.
Yeah.
Like, is he and that's what I loved about Steve. Is he precious? Do you know him? Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. What am I doing? Like, it's almost like you like wake up a little bit. Like, oh, what am I doing? Like, what am I? Why am I even submitting to that?
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to where I think we can start to wrap up for tonight. Steve's 3 main points were for us to consider God's providence, count on God's goodness, and cling to God's promises.
Yeah.
And that is the way of continuing to establish this foundation, define our reality by these things so that our life really is centered on this, like you're saying, just this utter trust in Jesus. And I think that a lot of times we're really practical people. We want the to-do list. You show me what it looks like day by day to, in some ways it's, let me worry about the checklist you're giving me so that I don't have to worry anymore, But I think that what sticks out to me so much from what you're saying is the root of what we really need is like, we need to know who this God is, who this God is, who says, I have your tomorrow.
I got it.
We need a deeper knowledge of relationship, love of him, to really be free of worrying about providing for ourselves for tomorrow.
Yep. Amen.